I always thought the worst thing that could happen in a quiet suburban neighborhood was a stolen Amazon package. I was wrong. It started like any other Saturday in Oak Ridge Pines, a neighborhood so manicured, so peaceful, it looked like it was built inside a snow globe. The lawns were mowed in ruler straight lines, the mailboxes were color-coordinated, and the residents smiled just a little too much. But beneath the surface of this postcard-perfect place lurked a kind of tension that only those who've lived under the iron rule of an HOA would understand. And the queen of that iron rule was Karen Whitmore, also known as HOA Karen. If Satan opened a welcome center for hell, Karen would be the one standing at the front desk with a clipboard and a fake smile. Her house was directly across the street from ours, and she never missed an opportunity to remind us that we were, in her words, barely meeting the minimum visual standards of Oak Ridge Pines. It was around 10:15 a.m. The sun was just high enough to cast a warm glow over the neighborhood. I was mowing the lawn, headphones in, listening to an audiobook about emotional resilience, something I didn't realize I'd need in bulk that day. A few feet away, my 10-year-old son, Noah, sat under our oak tree, his favorite spot in the entire world. He had his weighted blanket draped across his lap, headphones on, and was rotating one of his favorite fidget spinners, a blue and orange swirl that sparkled in the sunlight. Noah is autistic. Crowds, loud sounds, or sudden change can overwhelm him, but under that tree, with his toys and the sound of birds chirping, he was at peace. Every Saturday, we had a ritual. I'd mow the lawn, and he'd watch butterflies, talk to himself about stars and dinosaurs, and ask deep questions like, "Do trees sleep?" That Saturday was no different, until it was. I went inside for just a moment. Just enough time to grab a cold water bottle and check the timer on the oven. We were baking his favorite chocolate chip cookies. I wasn't gone more than 2 minutes. But when I stepped back outside, the first thing I noticed was the silence. The lawnmower still sat idle. The oak tree cast the same dappled shadows on the grass. But Noah was gone. At first, I didn't panic. He loved to wander a little. Maybe he followed a butterfly or heard a bird and went to investigate. I called his name. No answer. I checked around the house, behind the garage, down the sidewalk. Nothing. Then I saw her. Karen standing on her porch, arms crossed, lips curled, into that self-satisfied smirk she wore like a second skin. I jogged across the street. "Karen, have you seen Noah?" I asked, trying to keep the worry out of my voice. She didn't even blink. "You mean the little boy?" "Yes. He was on my lawn, playing with my gardening tools. Dangerous behavior, really." My heart dropped. "Okay, where is he now?" she shrugged. "I locked him in the shed out back. He was disturbing the order of my yard." I blinked, certain I had misheard. "You locked my son in your shed?" She said it like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. "Just until someone came to claim him. That child is a liability. What if he broke something? My husband just installed a new irrigation sensor." My breath caught in my throat. I pushed past her, ignoring her squawking protest, and ran into the backyard. Her shed was an old, metal-sided thing, more rust than structure, with a single bolt lock on the front. I pounded on the door. "Noah, buddy, are you in there?" A faint knock, then another. "Yes," came a shaky, muffled voice. "It's dark. I want to go home." Something inside me snapped. I grabbed a nearby shovel and jammed it into the padlock, trying to break it open. Karen screamed from behind me that I was trespassing. I didn't care. I would have broken through the door with my bare hands if I had to. As I struggled with the lock, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a notification from Noah's emergency bracelet, distress signal activated, Federal Autism Response System. Notified, military link, enabled. I had completely forgotten that the bracelet Noah wore wasn't just for tracking his location. It was part of a new pilot program for high-risk neurodivergent children. In case of extreme distress or danger, it sent an alert directly to emergency services. And because Noah had been mistakenly flagged in the past due to sensory meltdowns, we'd been upgraded to full-tier response. What I didn't realize until that moment was that full-tier meant military. 3 minutes. That's how long it took. From the moment the alert was triggered to the moment the ground started to rumble. The sound was faint at first, just a low hum like thunder rolling far away, but it grew louder, closer. Then the roar of engines. Diesel. Heavy. I turned toward the end of the cul-de-sac and saw it. A convoy. Actual army vehicles, 2 camouflaged Humvees, sirens off but lights flashing. A black SWAT-style truck behind them. And behind that, unbelievably, a tank, rolling slowly, steadily, the way you see in war movies, not in quiet suburban neighborhoods. Neighbors came pouring out of their houses, phones out, faces pale. One man dropped his coffee. Another stood frozen, jaw hanging open. The convoy stopped in front of Karen's house. Soldiers jumped out, armed, focused. A man in a military uniform with a tablet approached me. "Sir, are you the father of the child in distress?" "Yes, he's in the shed," I said, stepping aside. 2 soldiers broke the lock instantly, with hydraulic bolt cutters. They opened the shed and Noah came stumbling out into the light, his arms shaking, tears on his cheeks. A female medic wrapped him in a blanket and checked his vitals right there on the grass. Karen? She stood there, paralyzed. She looked like she was about to faint. This is insane," she stammered. "He was just trespassing. The military officer didn't even look at her." He turned to one of his men. "Detain her for civilian endangerment and unlawful confinement of a minor, especially a federally registered vulnerable child." "What?" she shrieked, as handcuffs clicked shut around her wrists. "You can't do this. I am the HOA president." The officer turned to her, deadpan. "Not anymore. Time has a strange way of bending when panic takes over. Seconds stretch into minutes, and every shadow becomes a threat." When I realized Noah was missing, I felt that sickening lurch in my stomach. The same kind of drop you feel on a roller coaster, but without the thrill. This wasn't amusement. This was terror. I sprinted across the lawn, shouting his name, trying to keep my voice steady even though my hands were already trembling. "Noah? Buddy, where are you?" I checked the backyard first, my eyes darting to every possible hiding spot. The swing set, the bushes, behind the grill, nothing. My heart started racing faster. Noah didn't just disappear. He didn't like change, and he never wandered too far. I ran to the neighbor's driveway, peered into their backyard, called again. No answer. My mind immediately went to the worst-case scenarios. Had someone taken him? Had he chased a butterfly into the street? I scanned the road, looking for any sign of his blue jacket or the fidget spinner he always kept in his hand. The world around. Me started to blur, and then, like something out of a horror movie, I heard it. A dull knock. Faint, hollow, repetitive, thump, thump, thump. I froze, straining to locate the direction of the sound. It was coming from across the street. From Karen's backyard. My gut twisted. I took off running, ignoring everything else, jumping her flower bed without hesitation. There, tucked away in the far corner of her overly landscaped yard, was her old metal gardening shed. I never paid it much attention before. It always looked half forgotten, a relic of an earlier time. But now it might as well have been a prison cell. I ran to the door. It was padlocked. From the outside. I slammed my palm against the thin metal wall. "Noah? Noah, are you in there?" Silence. Then a tiny, broken voice. "Help! It's dark!" My chest tightened. He sounded scared. Not just scared, terrified. Noah didn't handle enclosed spaces well. His autism made him extremely sensitive to certain environments, and small, dark places were his nightmare. He once had a meltdown in a public restroom because of the echo. I tried the lock. No use. It was thick and rusted shut like it hadn't been opened in years. I looked around for something heavy, found a rock, tried smashing the lock, denting the metal, but not enough. My breath was coming fast now. I banged again on the door. "I'm here, buddy. I'm not leaving. I'll get you out." That's when she arrived, storming out of her back door like she owned the world. Karen, clipboard in one hand, phone in the other, her eyes full of fake outrage. "What on earth do you think you're doing?" she snapped, her voice sharp and condescending as ever. I rounded on her, fury boiling up. "You locked my son in your shed. Are you out of your mind?" She blinked as if confused why I was angry. "That boy was trespassing. He came onto my lawn and started touching my gardening tools. He needed a timeout to learn some boundaries." My fists clenched. "He's 10. He's autistic. You locked a child, a disabled child, in a metal box in the heat." Karen rolled her eyes. "Oh, please, don't make it a whole thing. He was just sitting in there. It's not like he was hurt." It was then that I remembered the bracelet, Noah's sensory emergency bracelet. We'd had it fitted a few months ago through a new federal support program for autistic children who experience frequent meltdowns or wandering episodes. What I didn't know at the time was that his device wasn't just a GPS tracker. It came with a high-level emergency beacon. Suddenly, my phone buzzed. I pulled it from my pocket. A pop-up alert appeared on the screen. "Emergency signal activated. Distress detected. Federal Autism Response System initiated." Below it, a red icon blinked. "Status, Level 1 emergency. Military-linked response enabled." My eyes widened. Karen leaned over my shoulder, trying to read the screen. "What's that?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Somewhere in the distance, I heard it. A low rumble, almost imperceptible at first, like thunder grumbling in the belly of the earth. It grew louder by the second. Karen turned her head. "Is that construction?" "No," I said quietly. "It's something worse. For you." I lifted Noah's bracelet, now glowing a soft red. "You didn't just cross a line, Karen. You set off a federal response system." She scoffed again. "You can't be serious. That's ridiculous. Over some tantrum-prone kid?" That's when I truly saw her. Not just as the nosy neighbor, not just as the woman obsessed with mailboxes and mulch height, but as someone who had no capacity for empathy, no understanding of what it meant to be different. Someone who thought discipline meant locking a scared child in a shed because he didn't follow her perfect little rules. The rumble intensified. Birds flew from the trees. The windows of Karen's house rattled in their frames. Neighbors began emerging from their homes, drawn by the noise. Some had phones out. Others just stood there in stunned silence. Karen looked around nervously now. Her voice trembled. "What's happening? What is that sound?" Then the first vehicle came into view, a military Humvee, followed by another, then a tactical support vehicle with medical insignia. And finally, what no one could believe, an actual tank, rolling down Oak Ridge Boulevard like we were in the middle of a battlefield. The convoy came to a halt in front of Karen's house. Soldiers began pouring out, uniforms crisp, eyes alert, moving with practiced precision. One officer approached, holding a touchscreen device with Noah's medical profile on display. "Are you the child's guardian?" he asked me. "Yes." "He's in there." I pointed to the shed. "He's okay, but he's scared, and she—" I turned to Karen. "Locked him in there because he walked onto her lawn." The soldier nodded without another word. He motioned to two others. They rushed forward with bolt cutters and sliced through the padlock like it was paper. The door swung open, and there he was, Noah, blinking in the sudden light, tears running down his face. "Dad!" I rushed forward and scooped him into my arms. "You're okay now. I'm here." The medic team swarmed in, checking his vitals, speaking in calm, measured tones. Noah clung to my shirt like a lifeline. Karen's mouth moved, but no sound came. Out. She finally stammered. "This is insane. He wasn't hurt. I was trying to teach him discipline." The commanding officer turned to her, eyes like ice. "You unlawfully detained a vulnerable child. That's false imprisonment and child endangerment under federal law." "I didn't mean to," she began. "You locked a child in a shed." "Ma'am," he snapped, "your intentions don't matter." Another officer stepped behind her, clicked handcuffs over her wrists, and read her rights as she sputtered and shouted about being the HOA president. But no one was listening anymore. The only sound now was the quiet whir of Noah's fidget spinner in his hand, and the distant hum of justice arriving 3 minutes too late, but exactly when it was needed most. It started with a low rumble. At first, subtle enough to be mistaken for distant construction or maybe a storm moving in. But the sky was blue, not a cloud in sight. The sun still cast long shadows over Oak Ridge pines, painting the freshly mowed lawns in golden light. The birds had gone silent. Then, the thunder grew louder. Not from above, but from below. From the road. From the earth itself. That's when people began to step outside. First one neighbor, then another. Phones in hand, brows furrowed. Some shielded their eyes from the sun, squinting toward the far end of the street. A ripple of murmurs traveled through the cul-de-sac like a wave. Something was coming. Something big. Karen stood frozen in her pristine front yard, still shouting. In vain as the officer led her by the arm, cuffs glinting in the sunlight. "This is absurd! This is government overreach! I know my rights! That boy was trespassing!" But no one was listening. The attention of the entire neighborhood had shifted to the hill at the end of Oak Ridge Boulevard, because that's when the convoy appeared. First, 2 military Humvees crested the ridge. Matty green, insignias glowing against the dull paint. Antennas swaying, lights flashing silently. Then the tanks rolled in, not one, not two, 3 of them, massive, unstoppable. Their tracks groaned over the asphalt like something out of a war movie. Dust blew into the air behind them, swirling like storm clouds. And finally, at the rear, a rapid deployment military ambulance, a sleek black medical truck with red lights pulsing like a heartbeat. The ground shook. Not metaphorically, literally. Lawn chairs rattled. Windows trembled. I felt it through my shoes, in my spine, in my teeth. My arms were still wrapped around Noah, who clung to me like a lifeline, his face buried in my shoulder, eyes squeezed shut, rocking slightly. I whispered, over and over, "It's okay. They're here to help. You're safe now." The convoy halted with perfect precision directly in front of Karen's house. The Humvees opened first, soldiers flooding out in perfect formation, tactical gear, calm expressions, hands resting on weapons but not raised. Their presence didn't scream aggression, it screamed authority. One of them, a tall, clean-shaven man with sharp eyes and silver bars on his collar, stepped forward. His name tag read Lieutenant Cole Hayes. He stopped a few feet from me. "Sir, are you the child's legal guardian?" I nodded. "Yes, he's my son. His name is Noah." He triggered the emergency alert. Colonel Hayes scanned the display on his portable tablet. "We received a Tier 1 neurodivergent distress signal 3 minutes ago. His location was tracked through the Emergency Autism Safety Initiative Network. Given the circumstances and potential for medical trauma, we initiated full urgency protocol." The man spoke in clipped, calm sentences. But I could tell this wasn't just protocol. It was personal. He wasn't just a soldier doing a job. He understood. Somewhere in his voice was a depth of empathy you didn't expect in military briefings. Hayes turned and gestured. 2 medics rushed forward with a rolling kit. They approached Noah gently, kneeling, not standing above him. No sudden movements. One of them, a soft-spoken woman, crouched to eye level. "Hi, Noah," she said, her voice like a lullaby. "I'm Sarah. I have some water, and we brought your favorite blanket color, blue, right?" Noah peeked out from my chest and gave the tiniest nod. She offered him a small weighted blanket and a noise reduction headset. He took both, clutching them like armor. Sarah glanced at me and smiled. "We've worked with kids like Noah before. He's in good hands." While the medics worked, Hayes turned to Karen, who had been reduced to wide-eyed disbelief. "This is outrageous!" she shrieked, the cuffs biting into her wrists. "This is a government invasion. I just detained him for a moment. The boy was disrupting the harmony of my backyard." The colonel's expression turned hard, cold, like steel icing over. "Ma'am," he said firmly, "what you did qualifies as false imprisonment, child endangerment, and under the Federal Disability Protection Act, unlawful detainment of a neurodivergent minor. That's a federal offense. You are hereby placed under arrest pending investigation." Karen tried to twist away, looking desperately at the gathering crowd. "This is madness. This is just HOA business. This is overkill." "No," Hayes said, turning his gaze to her. "This is what happens when someone like you thinks they're above compassion." The officers loaded Karen into the back of a black transport van. She screamed all the way inside. The sound of the door slamming shut was the sweetest thing I'd heard all day. The neighborhood was utterly silent, stunned. Mr. Delaney, from 2 doors down, lowered his phone slowly, no longer recording. Mrs. Park gripped her chest like she'd witnessed the rapture. Even the McCarthy's golden retriever stopped barking, as if awed by the sight of military armor rumbling past the picket fences of suburbia. And in the middle of it all, Noah sat on the grass, his blanket draped over his lap, sipping from a juice pouch the medic had given him. He stared at the tank closest to him with wide eyes. "Is that real?" he asked, voice soft. "Very real," I said, sitting beside him. "It looks like the ones in my history books," he whispered. "But better, because it's here to help." I nodded, tears prickling at the corners of my eyes. "Yeah, buddy, it's here for you." A few minutes later, Hayes knelt beside us. "Your son's alert system worked exactly as intended," he said, "and I'll be recommending your neighborhood for reassessment in the Federal Registry. Children like Noah should never be in a place where they're treated as threats." "I appreciate that," I said quietly. Hayes hesitated, then added something I didn't expect. "My nephew's autistic. That's why I volunteered for this program. This isn't just duty for me, it's personal. That moment, a career, soldier revealing something so human hit me harder than the tanks. Thank you," I said, "for taking it seriously." He nodded. "Always." As the convoy began to pull out, neighbors scattered, whispering. There would be HOA meetings, social media debates, and probably dozens of Karen-exposed videos by sunset. But none of that mattered. What mattered was Noah, safe, heard, respected. As the last tank disappeared around the corner, Noah tugged my sleeve. "Hey, Dad." "Yeah? Can we get one of those for our house?" I laughed, the kind of laugh that only comes after surviving something that could have gone so much worse. "I'll look into it," I said, pulling him into a side hug. "But for now, let's go inside and finish baking those cookies." The storm had passed. The thunder had rolled through. And Oak Ridge Pines would never be the same again. The storm didn't end when the tanks left. In many ways, it had only just begun. Karen was arrested right there on her perfectly edged lawn, her shrill voice echoing uselessly across the quiet cul-de-sac as the military transport door slammed shut behind her. But what none of us could have anticipated was how fast the story would spread. Within an hour, a local journalist had picked it up from a neighbor's live stream, titled bluntly, HOA Karen locks autistic child in shed. Military tanks roll. In! And by sundown, it had gone national. Camera crews rolled in like clockwork the next morning, tripods lined along the curb like tombstones of suburban privacy. Microphones were shoved in my face while I tried to bring Noah inside for breakfast. "How did it feel seeing tanks respond to your son's emergency?" one reporter asked. Another wanted to know if we'd be pressing civil charges. I hadn't even had time to exhale. The truth was, we were still shell-shocked. Noah wasn't physically harmed, but he wasn't the same either. He was quieter now, flinching at loud sounds, refusing to go near the backyard. His therapist said, it might take months to work through the trauma. That tore me up inside more than anything. As for Karen, her mugshot hit every news outlet by noon, and overnight she became the internet's favorite villain. People flooded her old social media with angry comments. Hashtags like #Tank Karen and Justice for Noah began trending across platforms. Within 48 hours, the HOA board, of which Karen had been self-appointed president, held an emergency meeting to perform damage control. But the damage was already done. Parents from across the neighborhood showed up with signs. Some cried, others demanded resignations. One mother said through tears, "My daughter is autistic. That could have been her." The board resigned en masse by the end of the week. Their attempt to appoint interim leadership was met with such resistance that the city stepped in to dissolve the HOA entirely, at least pending investigation. What followed was a strange, dizzying blur of legal paperwork, TV appearances, and the overwhelming realization that our lives were no longer private. I was invited to appear on morning shows. "A hero dad," one anchor called me. Book agents started calling. I got a handwritten letter from a senator. A National Autism Rights Foundation offered me a speaking slot at their annual Washington, D.C. conference, something I never imagined doing. All I'd done was protect my son. But apparently, in a world where cruelty and ignorance so often go unpunished, standing up and making noise felt revolutionary. Still, the attention came with weight. I wasn't ready for the flood of stories that poured in from other parents, hundreds of messages from all over the country. My son was expelled for stimming. My daughter was arrested at school for non-compliance. My HOA threatened to fine me because my autistic son plays outside and makes noise. It was endless, painful, and horrifyingly familiar. This wasn't just about Karen. This was about a system built to punish children who didn't fit the mold. And it made me realize something terrifying. If Noah hadn't had that emergency bracelet, if he'd panicked silently in that shed with no way to reach me, how long would he have stayed trapped? Would he have come out broken? Would I even have found him in time? I started to speak out. At first in interviews and later through my own blog. I told the full story, not the clickbait version, but the intimate one. What it was like to raise a child who needed understanding, not punishment. What it meant to explain sensory overload to teachers and neighbors, year after year. What it felt like to know your son was somewhere nearby, terrified, and you couldn't reach him. My inbox flooded again, this time with support. Autistic adults, parents, educators, therapists. People who'd been shouting into the void for years, suddenly finding an echo. And Noah, brave, brilliant Noah, started healing, slowly but unmistakably. His therapist introduced a new strategy. We rewrote the shed incident together, turning it into a comic book. In our version, the shed wasn't a prison, it was a villain's lair, and Noah was a secret agent whose emergency bracelet summoned his own superhero team. "And the tank," he said while drawing, "is the mega rescue bot." I laughed, teared up, and helped him finish the panels. That little act, reclaiming the narrative, helped him sleep through the night again. Karen, meanwhile, faced real consequences. The charges stuck: false imprisonment, child endangerment, and under the Americans with Disabilities Act, malicious interference with disability accommodations. Her lawyer tried to argue it was all a misunderstanding, that she wasn't aware of the boy's condition, but public sentiment was merciless. No one bought the excuses. She was sentenced to community service, court-ordered sensitivity training, and probation, but the real punishment was social. Her reputation was shredded. She was evicted from the neighborhood after the HOA dissolved, and multiple neighbors filed civil claims. Her name became a punchline, but I didn't celebrate her fall. Not really. My victory wasn't in seeing her punished. It was in seeing people finally pay attention, in watching laws get reviewed, in hearing talk of a national autism alert, initiative expanding its funding, in seeing Noah smile again without fear. The real fallout wasn't fire or fury. It was change. It was hard-won, uncomfortable, but it mattered. One evening, about 2 weeks after it all began, I sat with Noah on the front porch. The sunset was gentle, and for once the neighborhood felt still. He looked up at me with his big, thoughtful eyes and asked, "Dad, will they come again? The tanks?" I smiled. "Only if someone needs help." He nodded and said, "I like that. They sound like thunder, but they're not scary thunder. They're the good kind." I pulled him close and said, "That's right, buddy. The kind that makes bad people stop and listen." And we sat there, in the glow of twilight and memory, knowing that something had shifted. Not just for us, but maybe for every family who had ever been made to feel invisible. The world had seen Noah, heard his signal, and this time it had answered. The days that followed felt quieter, not in a mournful way, but in the kind of stillness that comes after a long, wild storm has cleared and left the air changed, the ground washed clean. It had been weeks since the tanks rolled down Oak Ridge Boulevard, but their tracks remained, not on the road, which the city repaved within days, but in the minds of every person who had witnessed it. Especially mine, especially Noah's. The shed, that grim little prison where my son had once sat trembling in fear, was the first thing to go. It didn't come down with ceremony or fanfare, just a few workers in reflective vests, hired by the city and accompanied by a handful of neighborhood volunteers. No one cried. No one protested. The wood cracked and splintered as it was demolished, a symbol of ignorance and cruelty falling piece by piece. In its place, something remarkable began to grow, a community sensory garden. It started as a modest idea, a few parents suggesting a safe space for neurodivergent children to play. But the idea caught fire. Donations poured in from all over the country, many from strangers who'd seen Noah's story online and wanted to contribute something meaningful. Some gave $10, others gave thousands. A retired carpenter from Michigan drove down just to build raised garden beds. Mother in Oregon sent a custom bench with carved images of sunflowers and butterflies. The local high school art club painted a mural, bright, abstract, and joyful, across the garden wall, and right in the middle of it, in bold letters, it read, "Every mind matters." Noah visited it every afternoon. The first time he stepped into the garden, his fingers trailing over the soft lavender and textured wall panels, he looked up at me and said, "It feels safe here, like it's smiling." I didn't know a place could feel like it was smiling until that moment. He wasn't the only one who thought so. Children who had once been treated like outsiders began to gather there. Some were on the spectrum. Some had sensory disorders. Some were just quiet souls who'd never felt welcome in the high-stimulation chaos of a regular playground. And the beauty of it was, no one asked questions. No one gave odd looks. No one complained about weird noises or different behavior. It became simply a space where every child could exist without apology. The change in the neighborhood was palpable. The walls that had once been built so high, walls of assumption, judgment, fear, they crumbled not with noise, but with understanding. New families moved in, drawn by the story, by the promise of a place where empathy had taken root. The former HOA, that iron gatekeeper of conformity, was officially dissolved, and in its place, a community council was formed, comprised not of power-hungry perfectionists, but of real people, teachers, parents, therapists, even teens who wanted to help. Rules were rewritten, laws were reviewed, but more than that, minds were changed. The house across the street, once Karen's pristine castle of scowls and complaint letters, sat empty for weeks. Her arrest had made it nearly impossible to sell, but eventually, a young couple with twin boys moved in, one of them on the spectrum. They were kind. They waved. They never once mentioned the length of my grass. Noah met their son, Tyler, at the garden one afternoon, and within minutes they were trading fidget toys and laughter like they'd known each other for years. That's the thing about kids like Noah. They don't carry judgment. They don't care about property lines or social ladders. They care about connection. And once they feel safe, they shine. Noah started to shine in ways I'd never seen before. He became more confident, more expressive. He began drawing comics again, this time full of stories where quiet heroes saved the day with kindness and clever thinking. One of his stories, titled 3 Minutes, was published by a national autism advocacy group and distributed to schools across the country. He was only 10, and already he was inspiring thousands. We got letters. So many letters. From children thanking him for helping them feel brave, from parents saying his story helped them advocate for their own kids, from teachers who reevaluated how they handled neurodivergence in their classrooms. And then one day, he said something I'll never forget. He looked at me from across the dinner table, spooning cereal into his mouth, and asked, "Dad, do you think the tanks would come again if someone else was in trouble?" I smiled. "Yes, buddy. I think they would." He paused, chewing thoughtfully, then added, "Then maybe we don't need tanks anymore. Maybe now people will listen before it gets that bad." And just like that, he had put it into words. The hope I hadn't dared to speak aloud. That maybe, just maybe, this storm hadn't just rattled fences. It had planted seeds, seeds of vigilance, of empathy, of change. Noah also launched his own YouTube channel. He named it Noah's Corner, and in his first video, he unboxed a glow-in-the-dark fidget cube and told his story, in his own words with his own voice. The video went viral. Comments poured in from around the world. "You're a hero, Noah. You helped me understand my son better. Thank you for being you." He didn't understand the fame at first. He just liked sharing things that brought him comfort. And in doing so, he became a comfort for others. As for me, I still mow the lawn every Saturday morning. Same beat-up mower. Same crooked rows. Only now, nobody complains. In fact, sometimes neighbors wave as I pass. The street feels lighter, warmer, lived in. And every time I look across the road at what used to be Karen's fortress of judgment, I'm reminded of how fast the world can flip when injustice is exposed. 3 minutes. That's all it took. 3 minutes of fear. 3 minutes of a child, alone. 3 minutes that echoed across the nation and turned a silent injustice into a roaring call for change. It didn't just change laws or headlines, it changed us. Oak Ridge Pines is no longer just a neighborhood, it's a beacon, a reminder that communities don't thrive on sameness. They thrive on compassion, on action, on the courage to speak up, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. And now, when I watch Noah play in the garden that grew from his pain, when I hear laughter that once hid behind closed doors, when I see the empty lot where a shed once stood, I'm reminded that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear headphones. Sometimes they flap their hands. And sometimes they press a button on a bracelet and wait quietly while the world rushes to meet them. If this story moved you, share it. Let the world know that silence can be broken, that injustice can be called out, and that even in the quietest neighborhoods, voices matter. Subscribe to the HOA stories for more true, shocking, and emotional tales from behind the picket. Fences and power-hungry boards that think they control everything. Every week, we expose the truth behind HOAs that go too far, and the everyday heroes who rise up to stop them. Have you experienced HOA overreach? Know a story the world needs to hear? Drop it in the comments. We just might feature it. Because here at the HOA Stories, we don't just tell tales, we uncover the truth.